Hey guys, my name's Sangeeta. I'm here to help you all earn your Coding for Good badges as we're all here at home. And so before we get started on Scratch, let's just take a second to think. What comes to mind when you think of the word coding? Maybe you've heard of the word programming. They mean very similar things, right? So let's take a second to pause, maybe talk about it with your mom, dad, or sibling about just what you think coding is. Maybe have a little bit of a discussion, okay? Okay, So now that you might have talked about it with somebody, coding is very simply put, giving computer instructions on how to complete a task. So your code itself are those instructions, and the computer will read them step by step in order to complete the task. And so when we're writing those steps, we need to be very clear, and we also need to make sure they are broken down into as simple steps as possible because computers in reality aren't the smartest. The code that's added to them is what gives them the ability to actually do all these awesome things that computers can do. Maybe do math, play music, take us to different websites. You probably played games on your computer before, right? All of that's powered by code. So today you guys are going to make a game in Scratch, and you're going to actually use blocks. Maybe you're familiar with the website or not, but they basically look like little puzzle pieces that we're going to drag across the screen in order to place in a certain order to complete the game that you guys are going to make today. But before you do that, before we head over to Scratch, I want you guys to check out Google Classroom and watch the first video link that I have posted. It's called the Code Stars film, and just watch the first one. The last two we're going to save for the very end. So there's 3 links total. Just watch the first one, pause this video, watch the Code Stars film, and then once you're done with that, head right back here, and then we'll figure out how to build our game, all right?
So let's take a look at what the game you guys are going to be building today is. So you may or may not have already played this game before, but it's called Pong. And basically what happens is there is a ball that is randomly going to be bouncing around the screen, and we will be controlling this paddle using our right and left arrow keys to have it move horizontally along the bottom of the screen. And we are trying to get our ball to bounce off of our paddle. Now, the reason we are trying to get it to bounce off of our paddle is because we are trying to defend this blue area that we've got going underneath. So, a unpleasant sound will play when the ball hits this blue area, and when our ball successfully bounces off our paddle, it will 1, change color, and 2, play a more pleasant sound. So there's your pop, and our ball changed color, and then let's see what happens. Okay, so I don't think we need to hear that sound consistently, but y'all get the point. Okay, so that's how our game works. Let's go figure out how we can actually build this. So in order to create a new project, I'm going to hit this create button at the top of my screen so I can open up a brand new project and start from scratch. Haha, no pun intended. So for starters, let's just pick out a background and grab 2 sprites. So to select a backdrop, I am going to head over to this blue circle in the bottom right corner, hover my mouse over it, and you get a couple different options. You can paint it, you can select the surprise button and it'll pick a random backdrop for you, or you can hit the search bar or like search tool and pick from the library that they have provided. So I am going to choose stripes. Feel free to pick any backdrop of your liking. Sprites are simply just the characters that you're adding code for. So our ball, our paddle, this cat that's on the screen automatically, all of them are characters that you can add code and make them do fun things. So the term for that is sprite. And you're going to hear me saying those words a lot. So you can feel free to pick any sort of object that you want bouncing around the screen. If you want a basketball, you want bananas, you want a balloon, a ballerina bouncing around the screen. I am going to pick a ball. Then I'm also going to delete my cat. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to click on that sprite and select that blue trash can button in the upper right hand corner of the actual sprite window. That way I can delete that cat because I'm not really interested in having that in my screen. Once again, I'm going to select the sprite button, which is right next to the background one, and try to find my paddle. I'm going to make my life a little easier and just type in paddle into the search bar. All cool. So now we got our area looking almost the way I want it to. Now, one last bit we are missing here is we want that blue area that we are trying to get our ball to avoid. Now, the way we can edit our background is I'm going to click on this white rectangle that's in the bottom right hand corner, and this is stage. This is the workspace that you will do anything that has to do with backdrops. As you can see, our motion blocks disappeared. I can't get any motion blocks. That is because all of the blocks here are for backdrops. And as you might assume, backdrops can't move the way that sprites do. But there are a ton of other options we have to make our backdrops also to have some fun, cool features. We're not going to really be doing a ton with that today in this tutorial, but always feel free to add on if you're interested in that. So what I want to do is I want to add that blue area at the bottom of my backdrop. So I clicked on this backdrops tab. This is where you can edit what it looks like and add whatever fun additions you want to any backdrop. And I am going to select this square tool so that I can create like a rectangle at the bottom. And I'm going to click on fill. Now fill is how you can change whatever color you want to work with. So I want like a dark blue. I'm going to increase the saturation. That blue looks good to me. And then I'm just going to click and drag to create a shape. Now something that's super, super important is we don't want an outline on this because it is going to affect the code you're going to write a little later. So the way I can get rid of that blue outline, this is super, super, super important. You're going to click on this outline square that's black. I'm going to click right here and I'm going to select this red dash in the bottom left-hand corner of the window that appears. And that is just going to get rid of any outline. Notice how that black has disappeared. So our bottom portion is looking good. Everything looks the way it's supposed to. Let's start adding some code. So I am going to click on my ball sprite. Now, each of your sprites have their own workspaces. You have to be super careful to be adding your code in the correct workspace. For example, if I want to add some code to make my paddle move left and right when I hit the arrow keys, I gotta make sure I click on paddle, see that it's highlighted in blue to make sure I'm adding my code in the right spot. Otherwise, you might make your ball move right and left by accident. So let's start with just getting our paddle to move with our arrow keys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to events. Now, events are, bluntly put, the events that the computer is searching for in order to know that it needs to begin running your code. These are your starting points. These are what your computer is constantly saying, okay, has the user clicked that green flag? Are they pressing an arrow key? Are they pressing an arrow key? And when the user does do one of those situations, it does click the green flag, they do hit their arrow keys, then the computer knows that it needs to begin running whatever code we are about to attach underneath. So I'm going to grab my when space key pressed block, and I'm going to click inside of that box around space, and I can select pretty much any key. I want to select, obviously, my right and left arrow keys. So I'm going to say right arrow, key pressed, and since I'm here, I'm just going to grab one more when space key pressed block and change that to say left arrow key. Cool. So now we got our two starting points, but starting points aren't enough to get our paddle moving, right? So, okay, now we're thinking we are about to add blocks that have to do with how our paddle moves across the screen. So I'm going to go over to motion, blocks that have to do with the motion of a sprite. So part of writing code, writing steps for the computer to follow is, again, breaking our steps down into super, super simple steps.
So first off, how do we get our paddle to figure out what direction it needs to travel in? Well, I have a point and direction block here. That's going to tell the sprite exactly what direction to point in. So I am going to click and drag and just attach that right underneath my right arrow key pressed, simply because that's just what I want to start with. And when you click inside of this white bubble, see how a circle appears, and I have an arrow that's facing already to the right. And I can move this arrow, I can click and drag, and I can have it face in any direction. Now, obviously, I want my paddle to travel directly to the right, so I'm going to keep it the way it is. I'm going to say, okay, it knows where it's going, but it needs to know how large its steps need to be. I'm going to say, okay, let me grab my move 10 steps block. Now what this means is every time the right arrow key is pressed,
the paddle will take 10 steps to the right, right? So now I'm hitting my right arrow key, I'm testing out my code, and now my paddle's moving to the right. It's as simple as that. So now let's try to do the same with our left arrow key. I encourage you to try to figure this out on your own, maybe pause the video. And I am going to say, I want my point and direction block, but this time I gotta click inside my white bubble and move my arrow to be to the left. Notice how it says -90. Maybe you're making some connections with math and angles and what these numbers mean. I'm gonna say, okay, take 10 steps in the left direction every time the user hits the left arrow key. And now I'm testing it out by hitting my left arrow key, and it works great. Something that's super important about writing code, always gotta make sure you test what you're building as you build it. Now, it's super important that we test our code as we build it because we wanna catch any problems that might be occurring along the way as we build our project, rather than building the whole thing first and then realizing that there's a problem with our game, and then it makes it a lot harder to retrace our steps. So it's really important to test your code as you build it, so just in case there are any problems, you can fix it.
Now, I'm going to say here, sometimes it's easy to get mixed up with our arrow keys. Make sure that the arrow key you're pressing is the direction that this arrow is facing. For example, it's very easy sometimes to accidentally have our point and direction be facing left, but it be under the right arrow key pressed event block. Make sure that it's to the right. So that's an easy way to catch a problem. If you want your paddle to move a little faster, you can increase the amount of steps it takes every time the arrow key is pressed. So maybe if you increase it to 20, it's going to move a lot faster in that direction. I'm going to keep it at 10, but it's up to you if you would like to make it faster. Cool, so our paddle moves pretty much the way we want it to. There's probably not going to be much more code we're going to have to add here, if at all, for now. Now, let's get our ball bouncing around the screen. Well, we said when I'm showing you the game that our Pong game begins when we hit the green flag. So that is the event that we are searching for. So I'm going to grab my when green flag clicked block. I'm just increasing how zoomed in my workspace is so y'all can see it a little better. So I've grabbed my when green flag clicked block to let the computer know that is the event that we are searching for. That is how we want to start the game. And for starters, we got to get our ball traveling in some sort of random direction. Well, before we said with our paddle, when we wanted to tell it what direction it should move in, we said, okay, let me get my point and direction block. So we're going to do the same thing here. Now, here's the thing. I don't want my ball to start traveling in the same direction every time I hit the green flag, because that makes for a really boring and predictable game, right? So how do we tell it to pick a brand new random direction every time we hit the green flag? Well, I can go over to operators and I can say pick random, and I can grab this oval and I can actually place it inside of this white bubble here. Now, that's what we're about to do. But I'm actually going to separate this so I can show y'all a little exercise. Now, I am saying I want to pick any direction between, say, 90 and -90. I'm going to say that I want my ball to pick any random direction, but still be traveling upwards. So all that means is it could potentially start moving kind of at like a 45-degree angle, if you see that connection with the number. If not, just moving diagonal to the right, or maybe start out moving diagonal to the left, or a little that way, or a little that way, or that way, or that way. There's lots of different options, right? So I'm going to say, okay, if I wanted to pick any random direction between about flat ways to the right and flat ways to the left, okay, well, I can say pick any direction to be between -90 and 90, because what this pick random operator does is it picks any random number between the two values we give it. So notice if I click on this, it picked 7, right? If I click on this again, it picked 10. I click on it again, it picked 9. All those numbers are between 1 and 10. So I say, okay, pick one between -90. I click inside and they say 90. It will say, okay, set my direction to be maybe 45. 45 is between -90 and 90, or maybe even -30, or
75. All those numbers are in between -90, but it'll never go to 150 because 150 is larger than 90. So it's outside the set of numbers that we've said we want ball to actually be in. So I'm going to click and drag, pick random inside of my point and direction. I'm going to say, okay, pick any random upward direction. Cool. Now we got to tell it now it knows what random spots or what random direction it's traveling in to start with, but it's still not going anywhere. So we say, okay, you have to move 10 steps, right? Take a step in that direction. So go back to motion and grab our move 10 steps. Cool. And then we say, okay, you were moving 10 steps. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to hit my green flag. It did take a step in a random direction. It's kind of, notice I was just kind of going all over the place. We say, okay, well, first of all, it's already going past the edge upwards, and that's not good. We want it to bounce off of the edge. So off the bat, I'm going to say, let me grab this if on edge bounce block to keep my ball inside of the screen.
I don't want it to go past these edges because we don't want it to disappear. So I'm going to hit my green flag over and over and over again. And now notice how our ball can't go past the edge. But obviously, we only want to hit the green flag one time.
So we say, okay, that means I have to have my move 10 steps block repeating over and over and over again. So I don't have to have it move 10 steps every single time I hit the green flag, but it knows to constantly move 10 steps. So all we got to do for that is we say, let's go over to control, and I'm going to grab this block that says forever here. Now what this is called is a forever loop. Now what a forever loop does is any block that goes inside is told to repeat over and over and over again. And that's exactly what we want. We want our move 10 steps to repeat over and over again. And we also want our command of the ball being told to always bounce off the edge to be running over and over again, because there's never a time where we want the ball to go off the edge. So in order to separate my blocks, I'm going to click on the block that is directly underneath the point that I want to separate it from. For example, I'm trying to separate from point and direction and move 10 steps. I'm going to grab the move 10 steps since it's underneath. If you try to grab from the top, you're going to get the whole script. If you grab from the bottom block, you can break things apart. So I'm going to place this inside of my forever loop to tell these blocks to go over and over again. And notice how there is a smooth edge under our forever loop rather than there being another notch like our regular puzzle pieces. That's because any blocks that are placed in here are going to be going forever and ever. So if we can't place any blocks underneath, because our code will never get to it, because it's always going to be repeating what's in here. So now let's reattach them and test out our game and see what happens. And would you look at that? So we got a ball that's randomly bouncing around the screen. If I hit the green flag again, I'm gonna hit stop. It's moving pretty randomly. Now, one last thing is we have to get our ball actually bouncing off of our paddle, right? Because if right now I move my paddle, looks like our ball it goes right through it. We want it to look like our ball is bouncing off of our paddle. Well, first off, ball has to know that it's touching the paddle. It has to have some way of detecting that it is touching the paddle versus just moving around in regular empty space. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, let's go to sensing, because the ball needs to sense that it's touching another sprite. And I am going to grab the very first sensing block that says touching mouse pointer. I'm going to click inside and say, okay, paddle. Paddle's an option there because it's another sprite, and paddle's the name of my sprite. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to check if my ball is touching my paddle. Well, I can't really fit this in here. It doesn't look like my regular blocks. Well, that's because I'm going to go back into control, and I'm going to grab this block right here. Now it looks very similar to a loop, but don't be fooled. They do very, very different things. This is called an if statement. This is our way of forming something called a conditional. And what that means is telling a sprite to check for certain situations, and if that situation occurs, then we are going to run some sort of command. So the place we're going to check for a specific situation, in this case, the situation is my ball touching my paddle? So I can actually place this hexagon inside of my if statement and it'll expand to fit it. And then I'm going to say, okay, if you're touching the paddle, well, I want you to bounce off. Well, the way it can bounce off the paddle is it can change the direction that it's traveling in. You see, when the ball's moving towards the paddle, it's moving in a downward direction, right? So we say, okay, as soon as you touch the paddle, you can't continue moving in a downward direction. So pick any upward direction. So as soon as you touch the paddle, say, I need to start moving up now. Well, that's pretty much what we said here in our point and direction block, right? We said pick any random direction that's still up, or at least to the side. So we can just use the same blocks again. So I'm going to go back into my motion block, say point and direction 90, head over to operators, I'm going to say pick random 1 to 10, then change that to say -90 and 90. Now this is great and all, but where do we got to place it? Well, I can place this right inside of my forever loop. And it doesn't matter a ton if it's above or below this if on edge bounds. I'm going to keep it below. Now the reason we place this inside of our forever loop rather than above it is because if I were to place this if statement right above here and outside my forever loop, the computer will check one time. It's going to say, for example, if I were to hit the green flag right now, it's going to say, okay, say my ball started here. It's going to say, okay, is my ball touching my paddle? Nope. Okay, then I'm not going to look at whatever command we've placed inside because the condition that we were checking for is if it was touching the paddle, and it wasn't. So I have no reason to look inside and see if I need to run this command because I know I don't need to. And it's going to enter this forever loop. And then here's the thing. It's never going to check again. We want our ball constantly wondering if it's touching the paddle so that it can run the command we've placed inside when that situation does occur. So in order to have our ball constantly wondering if it's touching the paddle, we got to place that inside of a forever loop. So now I'm going to hit the green flag, and boom, we got a ball bouncing off a paddle. Now, technically your game of Pong works. You could say it's completed if you would like to, but if you'd also like to move a little forward and add just a couple extra little pieces for fun, let's get some sounds and some fun colors going, right? So first off, we want our ball to make that awful sound when it touches that blue area to motivate the player to actually move their paddle and defend that blue area from the ball. So the same way we checked if the ball was touching the paddle, we're gonna say, okay, let's check, let's use another conditional, and let's say, okay, is my ball touching my blue area?
Now what we're going to do is we're going to head over to sensing, because again, it's the ball sensing a situation. And instead of grabbing this touching paddle, I'm going to grab this touching color sensing block.
Now, the way we are going to figure out if the ball is touching this exact blue, you may or may not have picked blue, you may have picked purple or green or yellow. The way you are going to get that exact color match is I'm going to click inside of this bubble for our touching color sensing block. And I'm going to grab this tool at the bottom of the window that appears. Now this is like a dropper tool. Now I'm going to click here. And I am going to move my cursor over to my window where my game is happening. And notice how my circle completely outlines in blue when that middle, like little like black dot that's in the center is over top of that blue color. So if I put that over top my green color, that big circle is going to outline in green. See how it is outlined in that light green, and then it'll be outlined in white or even yellow? Well, we want it to take the blue. So I'm going to click over the blue and notice how it automatically filled that touching color to be the exact match of what is inside. You have to use that dropper tool to get that exact color match, because otherwise your code will not work. So you just use the dropper tool and it's much easier. Once again, you click there and just hover your circle over your blue area until the whole thing is outlined in your color. Now, just like our other sensing block, we're going to place this inside of an if statement. So I'm going to grab my if statement, I'm going to place it inside. I'm going to say, okay, I also want the ball to constantly check if it's touching that blue area. So I'm going to place that right underneath my if statement, but inside of my forever loop. You do not, this is a mistake that's very common. You don't want to put this if statement like accidentally inside of the other one. Notice how it looks like it's inside of the other if statement. You want it to be on its own, just inside of the forever loop. So make sure that they're one underneath each other. So double check that and be super, super sure that one if statement is underneath the other, but all of them are inside of your forever loop.
Say, okay, ball's constantly wondering if it's touching the blue, but it's still not going to do anything if it does touch the area. So what you're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, we want it to play a sound. So I'm going to go over to sounds.
And I am going to click on the sound tab. Now the sounds tab lets us pick a bunch of different sounds that we could want our sprites to ever play. So once you click on the sounds tab, select this blue circle that's in the bottom left corner. And now you have a whole library of sounds to pick from. And the way you can test out different sounds is you can hover your cursor over these purple play buttons. So that is not a good sound. So you can hover over them, and when you're ready to make a selection, you can click on the sample. I'm going to head over to Wacky, and I'm going to pick the toy honk. Oh my goodness. That is definitely very frightening. And then what we are going to do is we're going to say, okay, play the sound when we touch our blue color. Now the reason I'm going to grab the start sound block, not the play sound until done, is because we want it to just start the sound and then continue running the rest of our code. If we say play sound until done, it is going to pause the rest of your code to let this entire sound finish playing and then continue. So basically what's going to happen is your ball is going to take a little bit of a pause here, let the sound play, and then go. But when you just say the start sound, it will begin to play the sound and then continue moving. There won't be a pause. All right, let me test it out real quick. Great. Then let's make our ball play a sound when it touches our paddle. A much more pleasant sound. So all we have to do here is, since I already have a pop sound in my samples, I can just head over to code, click on this menu that appears with start sound, and I'm going to click pop. I'm going to say start sound when it touches the paddle. And say cool. When my ball touches the paddle, it's going to make a sound as well as bounce off of it. And one last thing is I want my ball to change the color every time it touches the paddle. Now there is a really fun block for this. You can head over to looks and select the change color effect by block. Now what this is going to do is it's going to just slightly change this color of our sprite every time that it touches the paddle. So it's just going to increasingly move through the rainbow. And I'm going to place that right underneath that start sound, once again, inside of my if touching paddle conditional statement, because these are features that I only want to happen if my ball touches the paddle. I don't want my ball to play a sound just on any random occasion. I want it to only play the sound when it's touching the paddle. So let's hit the green flag, test it out, see what happens. Double check that everything works right. And it pops and it changes its color. I'm going to try it again. Notice how our color still changed a little. And it's just going to keep moving through the rainbow. Now that's pretty dope. Now at this point, you have, oh my God. At this point, you have completed your project. Now, one last request I have for y'all is make sure you name your project. So I'm going to call mine Pong Game. And also, if there is a save now statement appearing here, click on it. If it is empty like my screen looks right now, that means your project has been automatically saved by Scratch. And it means that you are perfectly safe to exit this window without losing your progress. But in order to say that you've completed the requirements for your first Coding for Good badge, you have to head over to Google Classroom and watch our final 2 videos to learn about some really awesome women in the technology field. One of them, her name is Fran. She works at Pixar, and maybe you've seen some really awesome Pixar movies. She actually worked on creating the characters for Brave as well as Inside Out. And so you'll learn a little bit about how technology plays a big part in her career, but also how art plays a big role in her career and how you can combine the two. And the other video is about a woman named Isis Anchele, and she is an engineer, and you'll learn a little bit more about her story of getting into STEM. So once you watch those 2 videos, at that point, congratulations, you will have earned your very first Coding for Good badge. You should be very proud of yourself. And you will also have completed a really, really awesome Pong game. So before you leave, make sure that you take a photo with your project, as well as perhaps record a video showing off your game and explaining maybe parts of your code, and post it on step number 4 of Google Classroom. And at that point, you will be all done. Awesome job.